The crosshairs trembled against her cheek as Sarah's finger found the trigger. 50 yards away, Commander Jake Morrison, the man who'd destroyed her brother's military career, stood perfectly still, waiting. "You're shot," he whispered, stepping back from the rifle range. But this wasn't about marksmanship anymore. This was about the secret that had just shattered everything she thought she knew about the night her brother died. One pull of the trigger, and either justice would finally be served, or she'd discover that sometimes the real enemy isn't the one standing in front of you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned military training facility as Sarah Chen adjusted the scope on her rifle for what she thought would be the last time. Her hands moved with practiced precision, muscle memory from countless hours of training, but her heart hammered against her ribs with anticipation that had nothing to do with marksmanship. Commander Jake Morrison stood 20 feet behind her, his presence as suffocating as the August heat rising from the cracked asphalt. She could feel his eyes on her, measuring, calculating, the same way he'd looked at her brother Danny 3 years ago, right before he'd signed the recommendation. That ended Danny's career and, ultimately, his life. "Breathe, Chen. You're tensing up." Jake's voice carried the same authoritative calm that had once commanded respect from elite Navy SEALs across 3 continents. Now it only made Sarah's jaw clench tighter. She forced her shoulders to relax, drawing a steady breath as she peered through the scope at the paper target 50 yards downrange. The black bullseye stared back at her like an accusation. But this wasn't about hitting paper anymore. This whole elaborate setup, the private range, the early morning meeting, the careful choreography of getting Jake alone, had been leading to something much more permanent. "I know what you did to Danny," she said quietly, not lifting her eye from the scope. The silence stretched between them like a tripwire. When Jake finally spoke, his voice had lost its instructional tone. "What exactly do you think you know?" Sarah's finger moved to the trigger guard, hovering just outside the mechanism that could end this conversation forever. She'd practiced this moment 1,000 times in her head during the sleepless nights since Danny's funeral. The words, the positioning, the split-second timing it would take to spin around and put a bullet where it needed to go. "I know about the weapons cache in Kandahar," she said. "I know you set him up to take the fall for your black market deals. I know you're the reason my brother spent his last 2 years drowning in whiskey instead of serving his country." Jake moved closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Put the rifle down, Sarah." "Don't." Her voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare use that tone with me. Not after what you did to my family." The morning air seemed to thicken around them. Sarah had imagined this confrontation countless times, but she'd never anticipated the way Jake would go completely still, like a predator calculating the distance between himself and prey. She'd studied him for months, learning his routines, his weaknesses, the small window of opportunity when he'd be alone and vulnerable. But now, with the moment finally here, something felt wrong. "Your brother," Jake said carefully, "never told you the whole story. He told me enough." Sarah's voice was steady now, controlled. She'd learned that from Danny, too, how to compartmentalize emotion when precision mattered. "He told me about the missing inventory reports, the discrepancies in the supply manifests. How you needed someone to pin it on when command started asking questions. Sarah, how you destroyed a good soldier's reputation to save your own ass." She shifted her weight, preparing for the movement that would bring the rifle around. "How you made him sign a confession for crimes he didn't commit, and when he tried to recant, you made sure nobody would listen." Jake's laugh was soft and bitter. "Is that what he told you?" The question hit her like a physical blow. There was something in his tone, not the defensive anger she'd expected, but something that sounded almost like grief. "He told me the truth," she said, but uncertainty crept into her voice for the first time. "No, Sarah. He told you what he needed to tell you to make sense of what happened. But Danny... Jake paused, and when he continued, his voice was rougher. Danny was protecting someone, just not who you think. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger guard. Stop lying. I'm not lying. And deep down, you know it. Because if everything Danny told you was true, why would I agree to meet you here? Alone? Why would I give you every opportunity to... He gestured toward the rifle. To do whatever it is you came here to do? The logic hit her like ice water. She'd expected Jake to be cautious, paranoid even. Instead, he'd responded to her request for a private training session without question, showing up at dawn at a facility with no security cameras and no witnesses. Either he was stupidly overconfident, or... Because you're not the one who destroyed Danny's career, she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Jake's silence was answer enough. Sarah's world tilted sideways. The careful architecture of her revenge plot, built over months of planning and fueled by 3 years of grief and rage, began to crumble. Then who? Put the rifle down first. Her hands were shaking now, the scope's image wavering. Tell me who. Sarah. Jake's voice was gentle but unyielding. Put the rifle down. For a moment, the only sound was her ragged breathing and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. Then, slowly, Sarah lowered the weapon and turned to face him. Jake's face was weathered by sun and conflict, marked by the kind of lines that came from making impossible decisions in impossible situations. But his eyes held something she hadn't expected to see. Understanding. Your brother was the best soldier I ever served with, he said. Smart, loyal, and honest to a fault, which is exactly why he was in the perfect position to discover what was really happening with those weapons. Sarah felt the world shifting beneath her feet. What are you talking about? Jake pulled a manila envelope from his jacket pocket and held it out to her. Danny didn't stumble onto a black market operation, Sarah. He uncovered something much worse, and when he tried to report it through proper channels, he learned that the corruption went higher than either of us imagined. Sarah stared at the envelope like it might contain a live grenade. How high? High enough that Danny knew reporting it would get him killed, so he did the only thing he could do. He took the blame for a smaller crime to avoid exposing a larger one. He sacrificed his career to protect classified intelligence about a weapons trafficking network that reaches all the way to... The sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed across the range. Sarah threw herself to the ground as Jake spun toward the tree line beyond the targets, his hand moving instinctively toward a sidearm that wasn't there. 50 yards away, the paper target she'd been aiming at sprouted a perfect, whole, dead center of the bullseye. Very impressive shooting, Ms. Chen. The voice came from behind them. Sarah rolled to her knees and saw a figure stepping out from behind the concrete blast barrier that separated the range from the parking area. The man was tall and lean, with silver hair and a smile that somehow made the rifle in his hands look casual, almost friendly. Colonel Reeves, Jake said quietly. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Colonel Marcus Reeves, Danny's former commanding officer, the man who'd signed his discharge papers, who delivered the eulogy at his funeral with such apparent sincerity that she'd wept in gratitude. Hello, Jake. Sarah. Reeves moved closer, keeping the rifle trained on them with military precision. I have to say I'm disappointed. I'd hoped we could resolve this situation without involving the girl, but Jake, you always were too sentimental, for your own good. Understanding crashed over Sarah like a cold wave. You're the one who ran the most profitable weapons redistribution network the military has ever seen, guilty as charged. Reeves's smile widened. Your brother was quite the detective, Sarah. Too bad he was also quite naive about how the chain of command really works. Jake shifted slightly, positioning himself between Sarah and Reeves. Danny kept records. If anything happens to us... Oh, you mean these records? Reeves reached into his jacket with his free hand and pulled out a thick folder. The ones I removed from his apartment after his accident? Really, Jake? You're smarter than that. The word accident hit Sarah like a physical blow. Danny's death, the single-car crash on a rainy night, blood alcohol 3 times the legal limit, suddenly took on a sinister new shape. "You killed him," she whispered. "I neutralized a threat to national security," Reeves corrected. Danny was going to expose an operation that funds black sites and off-the-books missions that keep America safe. Sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices. Sarah's vision went red around the edges. She started to rise, her hands clenching into fists, but Jake caught her arm. "Easy," he murmured. "Stay calm," Reeves chuckled. "Good advice, though. I'm afraid staying calm won't change the outcome here. You see, I've spent the last 3 years carefully constructing a narrative where Commander Morrison is revealed as a corrupt officer who murdered a whistleblower and her sister in a desperate attempt to cover his crimes. It's quite compelling, really. The evidence is already in place." "What evidence?" Jake's voice was steady, but Sarah could. 6 hours later, Sarah sat in a windowless conference room at the Federal Building in downtown San Diego, staring at photographs that made her stomach turn. Colonel Reeves's body had been removed from the training range, but the images spread. Across the metal table before her showed a different kind of carnage, one that had been hidden in plain sight for nearly a decade. 17 confirmed deaths, said Agent Lisa Vasquez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd introduced herself as the lead investigator for the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. All soldiers who got too close to Reeves's operation. All ruled accidents, suicides, or enemy action. Sarah picked up one of the photographs with trembling fingers. The face staring back at her was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a crooked smile. Who was he? Staff Sergeant Miguel Santos discovered discrepancies in ammunition shipments at a forward operating base in Syria, died in an IED explosion 2 weeks later. Vasquez's voice was clinical, but Sarah caught the underlying anger. The explosive device was American-made ordnance, from a batch that was supposed to have been destroyed. Jake sat across from her, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. A medic had cleaned the scrape on his cheek from when they'd hit the ground, but he looked like he'd aged a decade since sunrise. "How long have you been investigating Reeves?" "Officially? 8 months?" Vasquez pulled out another file. This, one thick enough to choke a horse. "Unofficially? 3 years. Ever since a certain Navy SEAL started asking uncomfortable questions about weapons inventory reports." Sarah looked up sharply. "You've been watching Jake?" "Commander Morrison contacted us 6 months after your brother's death. He'd been conducting his own investigation and had enough evidence to suggest Danny's accident wasn't accidental. But Reeves had covered his tracks well, and we needed more than suspicion to move against a decorated colonel with friends in very high places. So you used me as bait," Sarah said flatly. Jake leaned forward. "Sarah, I never meant for it to go as far as it did. When you reached out about private training sessions, I thought, you thought you could manipulate my grief into drawing Reeves out." Her voice was ice cold. "You knew I blamed you for Danny's death, and you let me keep believing it because it served your purpose. It wasn't supposed to happen like that." Jake's composure cracked slightly. "I was trying to find a way to tell you the truth without compromising the investigation. But when Reeves started taking an interest in your activities, following you, running background checks, asking questions, we realized he saw you as a threat." Vasquez nodded. "We'd been trying to catch Reeves in the act for months, but he was too careful, too insulated. Then you started planning what looked like an assassination attempt on the one person who could expose him. From his perspective, you were the perfect solution. He could eliminate you and frame Commander Morrison in one move." Sarah felt sick. "How long have you known about my plans?" "Since the second time you visited the gun range where Jake trains." Vasquez's expression softened slightly. We've had a surveillance team on you for 6 weeks. We know about the reconnaissance, the weapons purchase, the tactical planning. Frankly, for someone with no military background, you put together a remarkably thorough operation. The praise felt like another betrayal. Sarah pushed back from the table and walked to the small window overlooking the city. San Diego sprawled beneath them, looking deceptively peaceful in the afternoon sun. Somewhere down there, people were going about their normal lives, unaware that their military was being corrupted from within by men like Reeves. "Tell me about Danny," she said without turning around. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Jake spoke. "Your brother was recruited into a joint task force investigating supply chain irregularities across multiple theaters. He had a gift for pattern recognition, could spot discrepancies in data that others missed. That's how he first noticed the weapons disappearing from inventories." Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the window glass. But instead of random theft, he discovered a sophisticated network, weapons being diverted from legitimate military operations and sold to private military contractors, rebel groups, anyone with enough cash and the right connections. The profits were being used to fund off-the-books operations that Congress would never approve. Vasquez added, "The scope was staggering. Millions of dollars in weapons and equipment, moving through a network that stretched from Afghanistan to Syria to Yemen. And at the center of it all was Colonel Marcus Reeves, using his position and reputation to provide legitimacy and protection." Sarah turned back to face them. "Why didn't Danny just report it through normal channels?" "He did." Jake's jaw tightened. He filed 3 separate reports over 2 months. Each one was buried, delayed, or lost in the system. That's when he realized the corruption reached into the Inspector General's office itself. The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with sickening clarity. "So he came to you." "He came to me because he knew I had contacts outside the normal chain of command. Veterans who'd moved into civilian law enforcement, intelligence analysts, who'd maintained their security clearances after leaving the service. We were building a case, gathering evidence that could bypass the compromised channels. But Reeves found out." Jake nodded. "Danny got careless. Or maybe he was just exhausted from carrying the weight of what he'd discovered. He started drinking more, staying out later, acting erratically. Reeves's people noticed the change and started watching him more closely." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. She'd blamed Danny's drinking on his discharge, on the shame of losing his military career. She'd never imagined he was drowning in the knowledge that his own service was being perverted by the very people he'd trusted to lead. "The night he died," she whispered. "He was coming to meet me," Jake said quietly. He'd found something, a document that proved Reeves had direct knowledge of at least 3 soldier deaths related to the weapons trafficking. He was scared, Sarah, really scared, but he was also determined to see it through. Vasquez opened another file and slid a photograph across the table. It showed Danny's car wrapped around a telephone pole, the front end crumpled beyond recognition. The accident investigation found brake fluid on the roadway 50 feet before the point of impact. The official report concluded that a brake line had failed due to normal wear and tear. "But you don't believe that?" "The brake line was cut with surgical precision. And the alcohol in his system? It was introduced post-mortem." Vasquez's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "Your brother was murdered, Sarah. But it was made to look like he died drunk and alone, consumed by guilt over crimes he never committed." The room felt like it was spinning. Sarah gripped the back of her chair, trying to process the magnitude of what she was hearing. For 3 years, she'd lived with the image of Danny dying in shame and despair. Learning that he'd actually died, as a hero murdered for trying to expose corruption, should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt like losing him all over again. "There's something else," Vasquez said gently. "Something your brother left for you." She produced a small digital recorder from her briefcase and set it on the table. "Danny recorded this 2 days before he died. He asked Commander Morrison to make sure you received it if anything happened to him. Sarah stared at the device like it might explode. You've had this for 3 years? We needed to verify its authenticity and ensure it wouldn't compromise the investigation. But given today's events, Vasquez pressed play. Danny's voice filled the room, and Sarah nearly collapsed. He sounded tired, older than his 28 years, but there was a strength in his tone that she remembered from their childhood. Hey, Sarah. If you're hearing this, then things probably went sideways, and I'm gone. I hope Jake found a way to tell you gently. But knowing you probably blamed him for whatever happened to me. Don't. Jake Morrison is a good man who tried to help me do the right thing. Sarah felt Jake's eyes on her, but she couldn't look away from the recorder. I need you to know that everything I did because I love this country and I love you, the people I'm fighting. They're not foreign enemies. They're Americans who've forgotten what the uniform really means. They're profiting from war while good soldiers die, and they're using our flag as a shield for their crimes. Danny's voice cracked slightly. I know you'll want to avenge me, Sarah. That's who you are. You've always been my protector, even when we were kids and you were half my size. But I need you to be smarter than I was. I need you to trust the right people and fight the real enemy. Promise me that. The recording ended, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of Sarah's ragged breathing. He knew, she whispered. He knew they were going to kill him. And he also knew that his death might be the key to bringing them down, Jake said, because he understood that Reeves wouldn't be able to resist tying up all the loose ends, including you. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, not the hot rage that had sustained her for 3 years, but something colder and more focused. What else do you need from me? Vasquez and Jake exchanged glances. What do you mean? I mean, Reeves is dead, but he wasn't working alone. Someone higher up the chain was protecting. The cabin sat 30 miles east of San Diego, nestled in the Cuyamaca Mountains where cell towers were scarce, and the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. Sarah had bought it 2 years ago with Danny's life insurance money, intending it as a retreat where she could process her grief in solitude. She'd never imagined it would become a refuge from the very people who'd caused that grief. Jake cut the headlights as they turned onto the dirt road leading to the property, navigating by moonlight through stands of oak and pine that pressed close on both sides. The cabin appeared around a bend like something from a postcard. Log. Construction with a wraparound porch and solar panels glinting on the metal roof. This is off the grid? Vasquez asked as they pulled up to the front steps. Completely. Solar power, well water, propane for heat and cooking. I designed it to be self-sufficient. Sarah grabbed the go-bag she'd kept in the car and headed for the door. Danny helped me build it. He said every good soldier needs a place to fall back to when the world goes to hell. The interior was Spartanly furnished but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with bookshelves and a small kitchen completing the main room. A ladder led to a sleeping loft, and Sarah knew that hidden behind a false panel in the bedroom closet was something Jake and Vasquez would find. Very interesting. We should be safe here for a few hours, she said, lighting an oil lamp. Long enough to figure out our next move. Jake was already checking the windows, noting sight lines and potential escape routes with the automatic assessment of someone who'd spent years in hostile territory. How many people know about this place? 3. Me, my lawyer, and the contractor, who helped with the solar installation. Sarah paused. And Danny, but he's dead, Vasquez finished gently, along with anyone else who might have had access to Reeves's files about you. The reality of their situation settled over them like a suffocating blanket. They were completely cut off from official support, hunted by killers with seemingly unlimited resources and in possession of information that powerful people would commit mass murder to suppress. There's something I need to show you, Sarah said. She disappeared into the bedroom and returned a moment later with a metal case about the size of a briefcase. Danny left this here during his last visit. He said I should only open it if something happened to him, and I needed to understand what he'd been fighting. She set the case on the kitchen table and entered a 6-digit code, Danny's birthday backwards. The locks clicked open to reveal contents that made both Jake and Vasquez lean forward in surprise. Documents, hundreds of them, organized in clear plastic sleeves and labeled with meticulous care. Bank records, shipping manifests, communications, intercepts, and photographs that painted a picture of corruption so vast it took Sarah's breath away. Jesus, Vasquez whispered, picking up a folder labeled Operation Crossroads. This is everything. Names, dates, transaction records, shipping, routes. She looked up at Sarah with something approaching awe. Your brother documented the entire network. Jake was examining a series of photographs showing weapons caches in various Middle Eastern locations. Some of these pictures are classified, above my clearance level. How did Danny get access to this material? He had help. Sarah pulled out a smaller envelope from the bottom of the case. Someone inside the Pentagon was feeding him information. Someone who knew the scope of what Reeves was doing but couldn't move against him through official channels. The envelope contained a single photograph, a meeting between Colonel Reeves and a man in civilian clothes, taken with a telephoto lens in what appeared to be a restaurant parking lot. On the back, in Danny's handwriting, was a single word. Guardian. Vasquez studied the civilian's face. I've seen him before, recently. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through a series of photos, then held up the screen. General Marcus Webb, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The head of the entire military was running the weapons network, or trying to stop it, Jake said grimly. Think about it. If Webb was dirty, why would Danny label him as a guardian? And why would he be meeting secretly with Reeves instead of using official channels? Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. Because Webb suspected what Reeves was doing but couldn't prove it. So he recruited Danny to gather evidence, which means Webb is either our best ally or our worst enemy, Vasquez added, and we have no way of knowing which until we make contact. Actually, we do. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed them a contact entry. Uncle Marcus. Beneath, it was a phone number with a 202 area code. Jake stared at her. You have General Webb's personal number? Danny introduced us at his graduation from basic training. Webb was his commanding officer during his first deployment, and they stayed in touch. Danny always said Webb was the kind of leader who remembered every soldier under his command. Sarah's finger hovered over the call button. He came to Danny's funeral, gave me his number and said to call if I ever needed anything. Sarah, no. Jake reached for the phone. If Webb is compromised, calling him is the same as painting a target on our location. And if he's not compromised, he's the only person with enough authority to protect us. Sarah pulled the phone back. Besides, we're already being hunted. At least this way we'll know who we're really fighting. Before either of them could stop, she pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Sarah? Good God, what's happening? I've been trying to reach Agent Vasquez for hours. Sarah put the phone on speaker. General Webb, I'm here with Agent Vasquez and Commander Morrison. We need your help. A long pause. Are you in a secure location? As secure as we can manage under the circumstances. Good. Listen to me very carefully. Colonel Reeves's death has triggered a massive cleanup operation. They've activated assassination teams across 3 continents and put bounties on all of you. The Attorney General is dead, along with 4 federal judges and at least 12 other investigators who were connected to the weapons trafficking case. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. How many people are we talking about? The network Reeves was part of has been operating for nearly 15 years. It includes active and retired military officers, defense contractors, congressional staffers, and intelligence personnel across multiple agencies. They've generated billions in illegal profits and used that money to fund black operations, political campaigns, and private military actions that never officially existed. Vasquez leaned toward the phone. General, this is Agent Vasquez. What's our status with federal law enforcement? Officially, you're all dead. The attack on the federal building is being blamed on domestic terrorists, and your bodies were supposedly identified among the casualties. Unofficially, I've got a small team of people I trust absolutely who are working to expose this network. Before they can complete their cleanup, Jake spoke up. What do you need from us? I need you to stay alive long enough to testify before a secret grand jury that I'm convening tomorrow night. But first, I need you to help me identify the top of the pyramid. Because Marcus Reeves was middle management at best, and whoever's really running this operation is preparing to disappear with enough stolen weapons to destabilize half the world. Sarah looked at the documents spread across the table. Danny found something, didn't he? Something that identifies the real leadership. He found the Holy Grail, Sarah. A complete financial record showing exactly where the money from weapons sales was going. But he died before he could deliver it to me. I've been hoping it survived somewhere in his personal effects. Sarah's eyes fell on a folder she hadn't opened yet, labeled simply Final Report. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and spread the contents across the table. What she saw made her gasp. Bank routing numbers, account transfers, and an organizational chart that mapped the entire conspiracy from foot soldiers like Reeves all the way up to a name that made her heart stop. Secretary of Defense Robert Caldwell. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Sarah, what is it?" "The Secretary of Defense. Caldwell is at the top of the pyramid." She picked up a document showing wire transfers totaling over $300 million flowing into accounts controlled by companies owned by Caldwell's family trust. He's been using his position to facilitate weapons sales and then laundering the profits through defense contracts awarded to his own companies. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Webb finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "That son of a bitch. I served under him in Iraq, trusted him with my life a dozen times, and he's been selling weapons to the same people who were killing our soldiers." "General," Jake said urgently, "if Caldwell is running this network, he has access to every federal database, every intelligence asset, every resource of the United States military," Webb finished, "which means he probably knows exactly where you are right now." As if summoned by his words, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the night air. Sarah ran to the window and peered through the curtains. Against the star-filled sky, she could see the dark silhouette of a military aircraft circling the cabin, searchlights probing the surrounding forest. "They found us," she said. Webb's voice crackled through the phone. "How many aircraft?" The first rule Danny had taught her about being pinned down was simple. Make them pay for every inch. The second rule was even simpler. Never let them know how scared you are. Sarah Chen crouched behind the steel framework of the fire towers. Observation platform, her makeshift weapon clutched in one hand and her radio in the other, listening to the tactical teams coordinate their assault 60 feet below. The helicopter circled like a mechanical vulture, its searchlight turning the night into a harsh tableau of light and shadow. "Target is isolated on the tower platform." A voice crackled through the tactical frequency she'd managed to intercept. "No visible weapons, but she may have communications equipment." Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. They thought she was just a frightened civilian with a radio. They had no idea that Danny had spent 3 years teaching her everything he'd learned about urban warfare, defensive positioning, and the fine art of making enemies regret their tactical assumptions. Her earpiece buzzed with General Webb's voice. "Sarah, I need you to hold position for 18 more minutes. Can you do that?" She keyed the mic twice. an affirmative signal that wouldn't give away her position to directional listening equipment. 18 minutes. It might as well have been 18 hours. Below her, she could see at least 8 tactical operators taking positions around the base of the tower. Standard assault protocol would put snipers in overwatch positions while a climbing team made their way up the steel framework. They'd expect her to either surrender or make a desperate leap that would solve their problem permanently. Instead, she was going to give them a lesson in creative engineering. Danny had been obsessed with the tower during their childhood visits to the cabin. He'd spent hours studying its construction, noting load-bearing points, identifying structural weaknesses, and, most importantly, figuring out how to turn a simple fire watchtower into a defensive position that would make a medieval castle, builder proud. Sarah crawled to the platform's edge and looked down at the base of the tower. The main support legs were bolted to concrete foundations, but Danny had shown her something the original builders probably never intended. Several of the cross braces had stress fractures that 30 years of weather had turned into potential failure points. If she could create enough vibration in the right frequency— "Movement on the platform!" The voice from below was sharp with alertness. "Target is—" Sarah's first improvised projectile, a chunk of concrete from the deteriorating platform, struck the lead climber in the shoulder and sent him tumbling back to the ground. Her second projectile, a section of broken railing, clattered off the helicopter's landing skid and made the pilot jerk sideways. "She's armed!" someone shouted. "All units, target is engaging with projectiles!" The return fire was immediate and overwhelming. Automatic weapons lit up the night, bullets sparking off steel and concrete around her position. Sarah flattened, herself against the platform deck, feeling the vibrations from dozens of impacts travel through the tower's framework. Perfect. She keyed her radio. "Jake, are you in position?" "Affirmative. Vasquez has the documents and is moving toward the extraction point." "Good. When I give the signal, I need you to put 3 rounds into the southwest support leg of this tower, about 10 feet up from the base." A pause. "Sarah, what are you planning?" "Danny's contingency plan number 4. If you can't win the fight, change the rules of engagement." She didn't wait for his response. Instead, she crawled to the manual crank that controlled the tower's old spotlight, a massive fixture that had probably weighed 300 pounds when it was installed, decades ago. The mechanism was rusted solid, but Sarah had something rust couldn't account for: desperation and 3 years of grief-fueled workouts that had turned her into someone considerably stronger than she looked. The spotlight broke free with a shriek of protesting metal. Sarah guided it to the edge of the platform and looked down at the tactical team repositioning for their assault. The lead climber was already 20 feet up the tower, moving with practiced efficiency toward her position. "Sarah!" Webb's voice crackled through her earpiece. 15 minutes! She keyed the radio 3 times, the signal for Jake to take his shots. The rifle fire from the tree line was precise and devastating. Jake's first round struck the southwest support leg exactly where she'd specified, sending vibrations through the entire structure. His second round hit 6 inches higher, widening the existing stress fracture. His third round found the sweet spot, the point where metallurgy met physics and 30 years of structural fatigue reached its breaking point. The tower shuddered. Sarah released the spotlight. 300 pounds of steel and glass plummeted toward the base of the tower, striking the compromised support leg with the force of a wrecking ball. The impact sent a shockwave through the structure that Sarah felt in her bones, and suddenly, the entire tower was leaning at an angle that made her stomach lurch. "Move!" The shout from below was edged with panic. "Structure failure! All units clear the impact zone!" The tactical team scattered like leaves in a hurricane as the tower continued its slow, inexorable lean toward the southwest. Sarah rode, the platform down like a surfer on a 60-foot wave of steel and concrete, her hands locked around the railing as the world tilted sideways around her. The helicopter pilot, realizing that his hovering position was about to intersect with a collapsing tower, pulled up sharply and banked away from the impact zone. For a moment, Sarah found herself looking directly into the aircraft's cabin, seeing the shocked faces of the tactical team inside. She gave them a cheerful wave just before the tower completed its fall. The impact was tremendous, a grinding crash of metal against stone that echoed across the mountains like thunder. Sarah felt herself thrown clear of the platform as the structure folded in on itself, and she hit the ground rolling, using momentum and loose gravel to absorb the impact the way Danny had taught her during their weekend training sessions. When the dust settled, she found herself lying in a crater of twisted steel and broken concrete, bruised and bleeding, but miraculously alive. Around her, the tactical team was picking themselves up from various positions of tactical cover, their assault plan reduced to rubble along with the tower. "Target down!" someone shouted. "Repeat, target is down!" Sarah allowed herself to stay motionless for exactly 10 seconds, long enough for the tactical team to assume she was either dead or unconscious. Then she started moving. The collapsed tower had created a maze of steel beams and concrete chunks that provided perfect concealment for someone small enough to navigate the gaps. Sarah crawled through the wreckage like a ghost, staying low and quiet as tactical lights swept over her position. Her earpiece crackled. "Sarah, respond! Sarah!" She keyed the mic once, alive but compromised, and kept moving toward the edge of the debris field. Behind her, she could hear the tactical team organizing a search pattern, but they were being cautious now. The woman they'd expected to corner had just brought down a 60-foot tower with improvised weapons and physics. They were starting to realize they might have underestimated their target. Sarah reached the edge of the wreckage and found herself facing a choice: 30 yards of open ground to the tree line where Jake was waiting, or a longer route through scattered boulders that would provide cover but take precious time. She chose speed over safety. The sprint across open ground felt like it lasted forever, but Sarah had learned to run from Danny, not just physically, but tactically. She moved in an unpredictable pattern, changing direction every few steps, using natural terrain features to break up her silhouette. Behind her, she heard shouts and the distinctive whine of bullets passing overhead, but by then she was already diving into the underbrush where Jake waited. "You magnificent! Crazy!" He caught her as she tumbled into cover, his relief evident even in whispered words. "Documents?" she gasped. "Vasquez has them and is moving to the extraction point. Webb's team is 10 minutes out." Jake checked his watch. "We just need to stay alive for 10 more minutes." As if in response to his words, the helicopter reappeared. Overhead, this time equipped with a thermal imaging system that turned their body heat into glowing targets against the cool night air. "Move," Jake said grimly. "They've got Fleur." They started working their way through the forest, using every piece of cover available while the helicopter tracked them from above. Behind them, the tactical team was spreading out in a search pattern, using the aircraft's thermal imaging to coordinate their pursuit. Sarah's earpiece buzzed. "Sarah, this is Webb. My teams are encountering heavy resistance. Someone leaked our operational plan. We're fighting our way through roadblocks, but it's going to be at least 20 minutes before we reach your position." 20 minutes. With thermal imaging tracking their every move and at least 8 tactical operators closing in from multiple directions. "Jake," she whispered, "how good are you with that rifle?" "Good enough." "Why?" "Because I have an idea that's either brilliant or suicidal, and I'm not sure which." Jake looked at her in the dim moonlight filtering through the tree canopy. "What kind of idea?" Sarah pointed up at the helicopter circling above them. "The kind that involves bringing down aircraft with small arms fire." "Sarah, that's not the thermal imaging system. It's mounted externally, right?"